Last presentation today is Mr. Jim Parsons, who is the head of, the president of the National Aquaculture Association, and also the general manager of Cook Pacific. So, Jim, thank you for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Certainly like to start by thanking Matt Parker and all of the folks with U.S. Aquaculture Society that have made this virtual workshop happen today. It's taken a lot of effort. I can only imagine after doing some smaller versions of these that the pitfalls of getting a group like this together are many, and I applaud their efforts. Special thanks today to Shirley Chu for helping a few of us dinosaurs to navigate the virtual world. As Matt mentioned, I'm Jim Parsons, current president of the National Aquaculture Association and general manager of Cook Aquaculture's Pacific operations out here in Washington State. Very excited to speak with you today. A lot has happened since we last met in person at this forum, and I'm hoping that I can provide you with some encouragement about aquaculture in the United States and optimism and enthusiasm regarding where we're headed in spite of what we've faced this year. This journey with you today, I hope to first explain just who and what the National Aquaculture Association is, what the industry responses to the occurrences in 2020 have been that give us hope for the future, describe how I see the current state of aquaculture in our country, both in terms of growth and sustainability, and try to close by outlining what I believe to be the main necessary conditions for continued growth of our domestic aquaculture sector. So firstly, what the heck is the National Aquaculture Association? Well, we are the national voice for aquaculture producers in this country. Our board of directors is comprised of individuals that are either directly involved in aquatic farming or in the ancillary necessary businesses that support our U.S. farming efforts. Our mission has been defined by the board, and it's to ensure aquaculture's sustainability in our country, to protect its profitability, and to encourage its development in an environmentally responsible manner. We've recently expanded our board to increase our aquacultural diversity, if you will, and these folks certainly aren't afraid to keep our executive team on task. If you have a chance to meet any one of these 21 board members, you'll find them to be some of the finest folks that you'll ever meet in our business. Our organization, of course, is led by a very energetic and extremely knowledgeable person in the form of Mr. Paul Zajac, our executive director. So let's look at our perspective of what's happened in 2020 and how we can move forward. Let me start by saying that it's very hard to express where our country is and what we've learned this past year as far as seafood goes, any better than is expressed through the Eat Seafood America campaign. This was developed as a collaboration of the Seafood for Health Action Coalition and is found on the Seafood Nutrition Partnership website. It's a group of agencies, retailers, conservation advocacy organizations, fishing consortiums, aquaculture associations, and a host of others that got together to get the word out about just how important seafood consumption is for our health in 2020 and beyond. The work of this group highlights the importance of seafood for our immune systems, our rural economy, our working waterfronts, and it offers simple solutions for seafood to consumers. I encourage you to help get this word out by visiting it and sharing it. To me, it emphasizes primarily that it's not an either-or issue anymore, but that we truly need to embrace both responsible fishing and aquaculture in the United States. So if we look where we are and how we get out of this mess, I want to go back a little bit and talk about the fact that American farmers certainly have a history of resilience and innovation in the face of difficult times, and certainly aquaculture is no different. We've been involved in aquaculture for as long as our country's been around. I've taken a lithograph that's on your left from a manuscript that documents London, England's Great International Fisheries Exposition that was held in 1883. It was the largest fisheries conference of the time, and it helped establish fish culture as a global fisheries management and food production tool. Governments from across the globe sent their agents to display elaborate exhibits about their nation's aquatic natural history and to network with other fisheries experts at the exposition. Exhibits on artificial breeding and rearing of fish, as those seen in this particular illustration of the US exhibit, were the highlight of the event. The second picture on your right is there to remind those of you that live and work in Washington that aquaculture certainly is not new to the District of Columbia. This picture shows fish that were being reared in ponds that are located on what is now the Capitol Mall, being moved by horse cart in milk cans to a new home at the National Fish Hatchery. This was likely taken around the mid-1870s, as you can see by the construction of the Washington Monument that was not yet complete in the background. So keep in mind, this is coming after a period of great strife in our country, and it shows the resilience, I believe, of fish farmers even in the face of the adversity of a civil war. So we can certainly overcome our current state of affairs. Let's talk about where we are as an industry today. I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't offer some well-deserved thanks to various members and organizations that are in our audience today. COVID response has been diverse and widespread, as we've heard from Jonathan. The Department of Commerce, through NOAA, authorized fisheries and aquaculture relief money. The USDA's Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, administered through the Farm Service Agency, has worked hard to get money flowing to farms through its first program, and CFAP 2 seems even more straightforward. We certainly appreciate the work that you and your agencies have done on our behalf. Likewise, a hats off to the diligent effort that we've heard about this morning on completing the National Aquaculture Development Plan. We certainly look forward to ongoing engagement with you on this and willingness, and appreciate your willingness to involve stakeholders. In spite of the regulatory and economic challenges that we faced, let's look at where aquaculture in this country actually is, or at least was, as summarized by the USDA's National Agriculture Statistics Service in their Census of Aquaculture. This census began in 1998, was again updated in 2005, 2012, and 2018. I believe that we discussed some of this at our last workshop, but it's certainly worth repeating a look. You can see a steady growth in total aquaculture sales over the past 2 decades. If one calculates the actual rate of growth for those 20 years, it's somewhere around 3% per annum. However, there are some anomalies that have affected this growth and are worth looking at a little deeper. This shows the growth of aquaculture in those 4 census periods over time, broken out by individual segments. As you can see, growth in sport fish and shellfish over the time has been great. While the census hasn't captured it, and it shows a reduction in the amount of catfish being sold, catfish industry has actually been climbing each year from 2014 through 2019. Stories from within the industry this year in both bait fish and ornamental fish suggest that sales are strong in 2020, probably as a consequence of COVID. People either want to get out and go fishing or sit at home and look at their fish in tanks. Also keep in mind that a few of our segments in our industry that are operated by very few companies may have significant sales revenues are not included in these figures due to confidential information. An example of this would be salmon production in the United States. In a bit, we'll talk about how things like foreign competition in the seafood sector is causing some of this reduction in some sectors and what we can do about it. But recognize that there can be a variety of factors that impact our operations as aquatic farmers. An important example is a seemingly unrelated issue of fish-eating bird population increases throughout our country and their control or lack thereof now due to some regulatory changes. This has had a significant negative impact on certain sectors of American aquatic farms. Clearly, there's no one answer to continue growth in our country. But before we look at how we might begin to do that, let's look at another component that really helps to highlight the health of the American aquaculture industry. Many of you are aware that sustainability means many things to many people, and I certainly don't want to get into that debate today. However, in response to growing demands from the US public, a variety of third-party certifications have been developed over the last decade or two, and I show only a fraction of those here. Nearly all of them have components of ensuring compliance with all applicable laws, animal welfare, community involvement, workforce and occupational health and safety issues, environmental and ecological care, and social practices. While producers in the United States often grumble a bit about the reality of programs due to the fact that they're expensive and that our national, state, and local laws often assure that we meet the standards by definition, they are becoming a part of our everyday business life and are gaining wider acceptance. So let's just take a closer look at one of those and how US companies stack up. Since 1999, the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Seafood Watch program has worked to raise public awareness about sustainable seafood issues. To date, over 57 million consumer guides have been distributed throughout the globe. Their rating system includes green, yellow, and red rating system that refers to a best choice, a good alternative, or avoid. The system has mostly been based on environmental sustainability standards, but is starting to review other issues related to social responsibility and carbon footprints. The aquacultured species that you see here are generally rated as a best choice wherever they are raised across the globe and include products raised right here in the United States, such as abalone, Arctic char, mussels, oysters, prawns, and scallops. The recognition of the strict United States standards for aquaculture producers in our country is finally bearing fruit. Recognition for farm products in the species of hybrid or striped bass, catfish, shrimp, sturgeon, and trout are best choices for rearing in flow-through raceways, tanks, or open pond systems only if they were raised in the United States. Another example of the strides that US aquaculture is taking in sustainability is a new list recently published by Seafood Source, a leading publication in global seafood trade. It published a list of 25 North American seafood producers and suppliers making large strides in the realm of conservation and sustainability. The choice of these companies involved review by a panel of outside experts ranging from Fish Choice to the Walton Family Foundation to Global Aquaculture Advocate, among many others. Note that of this list of 25 seafood suppliers in our country, 5 of the firms are aquaculture producers that operate in the United States. These companies, Atlantic Sapphire, Australis Aquaculture, Cook Aquaculture, Riverence, and Taylor Shellfish, reflect the modern industry sustainability trends and are leading the way to a promising future. Let's look at their performance and recognize their results as a lead-in to a look at my perspective on how we can continue to expand our domestic aquaculture industry. May of 2020 saw what to me seemed to be a remarkable accomplishment for U.S. aquaculture, having been involved in this for 4 decades. An executive order from the White House designed to promote American seafood competitiveness and economic growth in the sector. A significant portion of this order involved aquaculture, and I'll spend the rest of my time today discussing how these conditions can improve our farming efforts and what else might be needed to increase our growth and competitiveness. The main themes that were outlined in the executive order can be broken down as follows. Identify and remove unnecessary regulatory barriers that restrict American fishermen and aquatic farm producers. Take steps to avoid duplicative, wasteful, or inconclusive permitting processes. Hold imported seafood to the same food safety requirements as domestically produced products. Promote aquatic animal health. Identify geographic areas containing locations suitable for commercial aquaculture and complete environmental impact statements for each of these areas to assess the impact of siting facilities there. And finally, to assess whether or not to update the National Aquaculture Development Plan. Let's take a little closer look at these and their importance to growth in our sector. Borrowing from a slide that Sebastian Bell presented in last year's workshop, I've modified his list to reflect the agencies and organizations that I have to deal with here in Washington State in order to conduct business. One has only to glance at the list to understand why Drs. Engel and Van Senten's research into the impact of regulation on sectors within our industry are so burdensome. Remember, the major goal of the executive order is to remove unnecessary regulatory barriers. There are many. From personal experience, I can perhaps explain the realities of what burdensome regulation looks like. In 2017, the Washington State Legislature banned the farming of non-native species in our state marine waters. We, as an industry, had until the year 2022 to comply. In late 2018, we decided as a company to comply with the will of the legislature and to move to the rearing of local indigenous species in our marine operations. We went a step further to highlight that we would decide to grow only sterile triploid animals in our operations. Application was made to our Department of Fish and Wildlife, and after numerous public comments and extensive research efforts on both our part and that of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, we had approval to raise sterile steelhead in our cages in late 2019. We were then told, however, that we could not move these animals into our operations until a modification of our National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit was made through our Department of Ecology to change the species from Atlantic salmon to rainbow trout. Nearly 1 year later, we still cannot move sterile rainbow trout, animals that are planted throughout our state in public waters, into our operations in Puget Sound. We are still in a public comment period on the draft NPDES permits, with an unknown time frame for completion and the loss of millions of dollars in revenue. We've also made significant layoffs in rural areas that have been hard hit by COVID. Unfortunately, stories like these are not unique in our industry, and not everyone can continue to fight this regulatory burden. Change is clearly needed. Not only did the executive order point out the importance to hold imported domestic seafood to the same food safety requirements as that of domestically produced products, both caught and farmed, but established a seafood trade task force to look at seafood trade strategies. The idea here is to identify opportunities to improve access to foreign markets through trade policy and negotiations, resolve technical barriers to the United States seafood exports, and otherwise support fair market access for United States seafood products. Keep in mind that depending on which source you read, 80 to 90% of the seafood that we eat in this country is imported. We have a seafood deficit of over $16 billion in this country. Numerous studies have identified food safety as a #1 consumer concern when they purchase seafood, and consumers deserve to have products on our shelves that are as safe as those produced within our own country. Adequate testing of both domestic and imported products is a must. Based upon the executive order, the USDA, with guidance from the National Aquaculture Association and American producers, recently rescinded the National Aquatic Animal Health Plan, or NAP. This had been a plan developed decades ago with great intent. However, no authority for its implementation was provided, and the plan sat on shelves for a variety of reasons. Frustrated, the NAA approached APHIS several years ago, and with their leadership, we developed the Commercial Aquaculture Health Program Standards, a voluntary risk-based program designed to assist producers that need health certification for conducting their businesses. A new plan, much more comprehensive in scope, is in the works within USDA and has USDA as the lead national agency for aquatic animal health in this country. We view this as not only an important step for recognition in international trade, but a huge step in the right direction for beginning to standardize interstate aquatic animal movement and certification, which has been based on a hodgepodge of state and local regulations for decades. The order also tasked the Secretary of Commerce through NOAA with identifying geographic areas containing locations suitable for commercial aquaculture and completing programmatic environmental impact statements for those areas. We view this as extremely necessary. Clearly, considerable controversy still surrounds the siting of aquaculture in the marine environment. Much of the sentiment against this arises from ill-informed, even fraudulent and libelous claims against the operation of open water systems. The steps taken to promote aquaculture development must be science forward, and agencies must join with aquaculture producers and organizations in defending the facts that accompany our industry. Any areas identified as areas of opportunity must have long-term commitments for their use, and the types of farming that can occur there must be consistent and transparent. Lastly, as a producer and an NAA member, the right to operate in the areas that are identified must be upheld by ironclad security of tenure that allow a producer to occupy the space. We and our legal advisors believe that that right, with centuries of property rights law behind it, must be enabled through a lease instrument if we expect to consistently develop marine farms in this country beyond the level of demonstration. Lastly, the executive order mandated a relook at the Aquaculture Development Plan of the United States, and we applaud the excellent work that's ongoing in this area, as you've heard summarized earlier today. You've also heard from countries that have developed very effective and successful development plans for their aquaculture sectors, and it's allowed them to compete globally and provide a significant amount of the world's seafood. We need to pay attention to what has worked. It's my contention, and picking up on Sebastian Bell's theme again from our last session, that for aquaculture to expand enough to even begin to meet our country's demand for seafood, we must build in economic assurances for companies willing to commit to this effort. What's that look like? I believe that the US must have a system in place that boosts investor confidence. Much of what we've discussed today plays a big role in assuring investors of the security of their capital, at least as much as any farming system can. First and foremost, anyone that's ready to invest in US aquaculture must have certainty that the regulations in place today are not only clear, but are strong, that will prevent detractors from attacking farms based on unfounded claims. Capital must be readily available, likely outside the direct involvement of agencies, but can be made more attractive to investors through programs of investment incentives and tax incentives. Programs designed to reduce the risk of an inherently risky business are imperative, possibly through the expansion of those programs offered by the Risk Management Agency and not always currently available to aquatic farmers. Training programs are needed for farmers and their employees tailored to a specific part of the aquaculture sector, and support designed to help recruit the next generation of aquatic farmers is imperative. We're certainly not getting any younger. Lastly, continued support of our program that identify and develop improved technologies for our sector remain crucial, but are only important if they are supported by strong growth within the industry. I'll close today by offering that while there is not a clear path to continued growth of the U.S. aquaculture sector, fish farmers have been finding a way forward to innovate and grow literally for centuries. By continued education of the American consumer and implementation of some of the action items that we've talked about today, are opportunities to make a direct difference in the health, food security, nutritional being, and quality of life of our citizens can be realized. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I think that we've all learned quite a bit today about what the U.S. could do and what other countries have done. If you have any final follow-up questions for any of the panelists, please put them into the chat box, or excuse me, the question box, and I'll pass them along. Here's one for Jim. What's the NAA's position on the language of the Aqua Act bill introduced to the Senate last week? Will NAA publicly support this bill?
I don't believe that we've actually had enough time to digest what's in the new bill. We typically do work through committees, and our Marine Aquaculture Committee is certainly looking at this new bill. There are some provisions in there that we applaud. There are others that we probably are going to question. Once we complete our analysis, we'll see where we end up.
Okay, I think that probably takes care of the next question that I saw in there as well, because there was two related to that.